Good afternoon and welcome to the Land Conservancy's second session of our annual Biodiversity Symposium. I'm Renee Baranka, the Director of Conservation Education and Outreach at Western Reserve Land Conservancy. We are Ohio's largest land trust encompassing a 29-county region in Northeast Ohio. To date, we've protected over 80,000 acres of natural lands, family farms, and urban green spaces. At the Land Conservancy, I plan nature-based programming for people of all ages, the goal being to provide a platform for participants to learn and develop a greater appreciation of our natural world. I am pleased to continue this virtual symposium to aid in our understanding of the importance of biodiverse ecosystems, both in our home gardens and natural landscapes. I'm also excited to moderate these webinars, which feature national and regional experts to increase our collective awareness about pollinators, native plants, and forces that impact biodiversity. We all can play a role in creating sustainable functioning systems through our gardening practices and support of conservation. Our final session of this year's series will be on February 19th. I'll be hosting Sharon Salvaggio, a pesticide program specialist at Xerces Society, for her program From Nursery to Nature: How to Find, Grow, and Collaborate for Pollinator-Safe Plants. Sharon will cover what we as shoppers of native plants need to know to buy plants that are safe for pollinators. You can register for this session on our website, and I will drop a link in the chat today for that. Now, I would like to take a moment to recognize and thank our sponsors who have made it possible for the Land Conservancy to organize this symposium and offer it for free. Thank you to the Ohio Division of Wildlife, Audubon Society of Greater Cleveland, Avonlea Gardens, Leaves for Wildlife, the Lake Erie Allegheny Partnership for Biodiversity, Cuyahoga Soil and Water Conservation District, Meadow City Nursery, Ohio Native Plants, which was formerly called Ohio Native Plant Month, and Nature Spark. And speaking of Nature Spark, I want to give a special thank you to Judy Simrock for recommending Lorraine to speak at the symposium this year. Judy stays on top of this topic and is always willing to talk with me about content and share information on potential speakers and topics to cover. I'm very grateful for her continued collaboration. Thank you, Judy. And remember, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the might be at the top of yours, but just use the Q&A feature to post your questions. It's very hard to track questions in the chat, so I am grateful if you will use that Zoom feature. We will definitely have time at the end of the program to address questions. So on to my show here today. It is my pleasure to introduce Lorraine Johnson for her program Tending the Earth, Cultivating Change. Welcome, Lorraine.
Hello, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation.
You bet.
Okay, I will share my screen.
Sounds great.
Okay. Wow. You're seeing my very
Yes,
messy screen.
yes.
It
We talked
disappeared.
about this yesterday, right?
I know. Oh my goodness, people. Uh,
That's Lorraine's mind right there, her desktop.
yeah. Believe it or not, that's my cleaned up desktop now. I will try this again.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, there you go. And
That looks fabulous.
okay. Wonderful. So everyone can see that?
Absolutely, we can see it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for this invitation, Renee. Thank you to everyone who's here today. I wanted to like see you all, but now I am going to turn off my camera just so we can and minimize the people part of this screen so that you'll be able to focus on the slides. So we'll be back after the slideshow, but I'm stopping my video now. And yeah, thank you, Renee. I was at Ben Goldfarb's presentation last week in this series, and I'm so looking forward to Sharon's coming up on the 19th. So I write books about environmental issues, specifically around habitat, growing native plants, supporting wildlife, supporting pollinators in particular. And that's what my work for the last about 35 years has been, and also doing public education around native plants and habitat and pollinators and advocacy work as well. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is actually from my most recent book, A Northern Gardener's Guide to Native Plants and Pollinators, that I co-wrote with Dr. Sheila Colla. Um, and the connections with this book and today, it's about ecological connections, about practical ways to support healthier habitats, and about a conservation ethic. So we profile all kinds of native plants, shrubs, trees, about 320. Um, to the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, Great Lakes, etc. So there's a lot of overlap what I'll be talking about today when I'm speaking about biodiversity and what we do in our gardens and how we can have a positive, I don't know, positive impact. I know we're all probably, well, I know we are all joining from different places. So I wanted to share that I'm joining from Toronto, Ontario, so across Lake Ontario. Um, and Toronto, also known by its Ojibwe name, Takaranto. It's the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabeg, and it's the treaty territory of Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. It's a sovereign country, which is something we always say now, just to emphasize. And there are sovereign First Nations, Inuit and Métis people as a part of this place as well, and who have been here for millennia on this land. Um, of this walk gently on the land idea, a lot of the grounding for this talk actually has to do with reconciling with nature. I think a lot, and to me, that is actually one way of talking about biodiversity. It's another way of talking about biodiversity. I think our disconnect from nature, not seeing ourselves as humans as a part of nature, is really the source of so many problems. So one of the reasons why I think gardening it can be so powerful is that it's an act of healing and stewardship and earth tending that is all about reconciling with nature, finding our place within nature and as a part of nature. So along with all of us coming from different geographic places to join this digital space, I think we're also probably coming from different places in terms of our engagement and journey with ecological gardening. I expect that some of us here today are new to this idea of ecological gardening, and some of us might be very steeped in it and what you might call the converted. We don't necessarily, if you're here, maybe you don't need to be convinced of how important ecological gardening is to biodiversity. Um, if you're new to this whole idea, I'm thrilled you're here, and I hope that you find that I'm offering some useful guideposts and actions to take. For those of you who are quite steeped in this and converted, I hope what I can offer today is ways that I've observed in the 30 plus years of talking about these issues with people and doing a lot of presentations. I've observed that people respond um, in certain respond fully to certain ways of talking about this issue, and maybe don't engage as thoroughly with other ways of talking about this. So for those of you who also kind of are, well, I think the way to build this movement, to build biodiversity, we're at a place now where we need to bring others in. We need to get to let's say, the unconverted, and that is our job as people who are interested in this and who are learning about this, and we can share that with others. So I hope I offer some ways that I've observed are really kind of useful ways to talk about this, to draw people in. And I think this is especially important right now. We're in a time of polarization. Gardening is so positive. And for the most part, you can have discussions around gardening that are not polarized, that draw people in, that build joy in people. When we talk about responsibility to the earth and reconciling with nature, um, those can sound like heavy topics, but when you focus on the joy of gardening and the joy of carrying out these responsibilities to the earth, which is really, expressing love. This I think is just the positivity that we need in these times, which is not to say that tending the earth and what we're experiencing right now in terms of what's happening to the planet is not also hard and full of grief. When we look closely at what's happening to the world, ecologically and in other ways, it's hard not to feel grief. But I think that there is nothing more meaningful than actually doing the positive work of engaging with the earth and healing the earth. I think that people don't necessarily respond to crises or talk of crises and the terrible statistics and stuff, unless, although I do actually, but I think I'm a bit of an anomaly. Um, I think if we share that, the scary stats and those kinds of things, then w we also need to share what we can do. And that's what I'm going to focus on. And I just want to let you know that the photo on the right there with this wonderful bus shelter, transit shelter, with a big sign saying grow native plants. That's actually in my where I live in the city of Toronto, where we are lucky enough to have a municipal government that values native plants to the point of putting this sign on a bus shelter. How positive is that? So I really want to focus on the garden as a place of action and also as the local place where all of these global issues, like when we talk about biodiversity loss, this is a series that's based in the idea of biodiversity. And, you know, we know that there is so much loss and globally. And we might feel like, I don't know how I can make a difference kind of globally. It's hard to influence, but locally we can have such an impact and we can witness that impact. We can see the effect. So that's really the core message of this talk today. And I want you to just remember, because I'm going to be referring at the end again to Lena Liang's native plant patch, which I'm showing you here on the slide. Remember her name and remember this garden. We're going to come back to it. Um, so I said, the stats, and the terrible news, the statistics don't necessarily kind of lead to action or inspire people. Um, but they're there. Um, how do we help people care about these terrifying statistics? Um, and I do think it's also important to think about this kind of scientific information so that our action is grounded in science. And, all of the science is telling us to be worried. And this particular study about the elevated extinction risk in over 1/5 of North American pollinators is really one of the most recent in the last year roundup kind of pieces of science on where things stand with pollinators. So, but as I said, sometimes it's hard to connect with this kind of stuff. Take note of the photo down there of the windshield because um, because I know that for me, all of those stats, all of that information, where I really felt the insect apocalypse that we hear about is when I realized, um, oh yeah, when I remembered there used to be bugs on the windshield. And that really came home to me reading this paper because there is scientific research on it. And a paper came out years, like almost a decade ago, about this. There are, this is how we experience biodiversity loss. And I really think it's important to connect it through lived experience. And I'm sharing there on the right the map of Pelee Island because that is, it's between, where I am in Ontario and it's, where you are in Ohio, for those of you in Ohio. But I share it because I went camping on Pelee Island a couple of years, well, I don't know. Anyway, a while ago. And we were actually bike camping, which was quite fun, but it meant we were riding our bikes along these very deserted rural streets, roads, tiny roads, late at night in the summer, total darkness, no other people around, on a very amazing ecologically place, which Pelee Island is, the alvar habitat, the rare habitat. And it was incredible biking and experiencing all those insects in a place where the habitat is such high value to insects, and having to remember to close my mouth on the bicycle all the time because we were basically consuming insects if you didn't close your mouth. Anyway, this is the kind of way an experience I think where biodiversity loss and the situation we're in right now can really be brought home to, in a personal way, and I think that can lead to action. So another big one for me, I'm just sharing some of, the examples that have had an impact on me personally. The turtles in Ontario, all of them are at risk. Well, the experience of, when I grew up, my brother was so interested in reptiles and amphibians. So he was always sharing with me when, the special places to go see turtles and snakes when we were little. So the fact that I don't see them anymore, except on, camping trips when the snapping turtle would come to visit, that's a real loss that I feel personally. Or the indigo buntings, the birds, the tanagers, the orioles that I remember from my childhood, which is a very long time ago now, I remember my mom talking about, these birds and, just not really seeing them much anymore. Now I'm in a big city, but that's what the research is telling us as well. The loss of 3 billion birds since the 1970s. When we experience that, and notice, like, it can have an impact. And so I've shared this photo of a beautiful rose-breasted grosbeak from our backyard where we have created habitat, and where we actually now see the impact of growing native plants and habitat basically growing, the insects that birds will eat and the berries and the fruit and the caterpillars that they'll eat. So, and the way that that actually leads to more birds, or the way that, you know, um, another example for me, very personal, is that the photo on the right is from the early 1990 or mid 1990s of my first native plant garden that I had, and it was right downtown Toronto. And it was the first time I'd seen a hummingbird. A hummingbird came to visit, I lived in a very, very commercial area, dense, right downtown. And realizing that, these creatures can come. I remember, the carpets of spring ephemerals. There aren't so many places to experience that now, the woodlands. Although, maybe if you have places close by, but where that resonates for you is seeing that the local woodlands are now so full of invasive plants, the invasive plants that are taking over natural areas, and then realizing, wait, I'm implicated in this in some way, in that, the pathway for so many of these uh, invasive species is actually through horticulture. So this connects, biodiversity loss very personally, for us with gardening, which is normally, and I'm talking about it as a very positive activity, but we have a responsibility to do it in a way that is not causing harm. And so one of the ways we can do that for biodiversity is to think, okay, so there are these plants that are like, the introduced periwinkle that is an behaves invasively in this place, which is not its home habitat. It's lost its predators aren't here. The creatures that consume periwinkle aren't here. Um, but um, if we think about the alternatives, so periwinkle is reducing biodiversity. Okay, so how can we increase biodiversity? How can we can do that by with positive alternatives, and we can share with other people. Again, this is a note kind of for the converted. For those of you who are wondering how to bring people into your enthusiasm for biodiversity and all of the ways that it connects with gardening. Well, I think the discussion around gardening and invasive plants can be really alienating for folks who are new to gardening. They're terrified of making a mistake. There's a lot of discussion out there around shame, shame for having invasive plants. So let's be positive and just basically offer alternatives. Don't try to pretend that the invasive, commonly available at nursery plants like periwinkle and goutweed and on, that we don't pretend that they're not a big problem, but we offer alternatives. We say, hey, new gardener, whatever it is about periwinkle that you love, well, this native wild phlox has all these similar characteristics. It looks the same. It's the same habitat, but it provides all of the benefits that native plants provide in terms of habitat. And I'll get into those benefits in a little bit more detail. But English ivy, another commonly available invasive non-native ground cover. So um, let's offer the alternatives. Let's talk about Virginia creeper. Now, sometimes this can raise some tricky issues because Virginia creeper is a native ground covering vine, and it will also grow up walls. Um, well, in my experience, I've found that there's a strange thing about Virginia creeper. It's a native plant. And even native plant gardeners often give it a hard time and talk negatively about it precisely because it spreads. Traditional gardeners, who are maybe not yet involved in native plant gardening, also disparage Virginia creeper. So what we can do for its spreading qualities. Now, obviously, you don't want that plant in a place where it's not okay for it to spread. But where you do have, let's say, a problem area or somewhere, or you're looking for a ground cover in shade and nothing else will grow, Virginia creeper is fantastic. And so if we share that all of the specialist relationships that this native vine supports, and I should say that throughout the presentation, I'll be including some screenshots from um, from Sheila's and my book, Northern Gardener's Guide to Native Plants and Pollinators. And that's what I've got there on the right about Virginia creeper. And for each of the, I don't know, 320 different trees, shrubs, perennials, vines, annuals, shrubs, etc., that we profile in the book, we did research into the specialist relationships that each of those native plants supports. And so you can see that Virginia creeper, we ran out of room to include all of the other species of moths that it support. So that is a way, and I think it's an important lesson. And these are just a few of them. I think.
Look, Lorraine, can I interrupt you? I'm just monitoring the chat here, and folks are saying that they get a lot of grief when they suggest Virginia creeper to people because it acts like an invasive plant. So, can you
Yes.
speak to that at all?
Oh, I
Thank
love
you.
it. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for
Mhm.
mentioning that, Renee. Exactly. And the grief that people get for recommending Virginia creeper is both, as I said, from native plant gardeners and from non-native plant gardeners. So it's like, we can't win. I think one of the ways to address that with Virginia creeper in particular is to talk about the many, talk about the importance of only planting this plant in a place where that spreading quality can be valued. When you think about, the focus of this talk is not climate change, although I will talk about how biodiversity and climate change connect. But um, in this time of climate change, we are seeing the stresses on our growing spaces. So the more frequent droughts, etc. We need plants that spread. We need native plants that increase resilience that can spread. And so I think that's one of the ways to bring people in. And I'm also not saying there are lots of other vines too, native vines. I just picked Virginia creeper because it is so um, I'll say controversial. It's not. It's so, there's such intense feelings around it. And to say, but if we can share the creatures we are supporting through Virginia creeper. And I would just also say, in that middle photo, for example, that's from our Pam's in my front yard, where we have Virginia, it's been like this for more than a decade with Virginia creeper lining the path. And it's just a couple of snips every year to throughout the season to prevent it from going into the rest of the shady area. But it's a lifesaver in, a very poor soil situation of total shade and a lot of drought. I hope that was helpful. Pipe up again, Renee, if people in the chat are saying, "Wait,
Will do.
you didn't quite answer that." So
Will
let
do.
me know.
Yep.
Also, just still kind of getting back to this way to how to connect personally and talk about these issues in a way that will help other folks who maybe aren't as steeped in this. Um, connect is, I think about the night sky and the way that I, experienced the night sky as a kid. You saw the Milky Way. Now, again, I am now in a dense city, but even there, I have seen the reduction in, what you can see in the night sky. I never see stars anymore. Well, this connects very much with biodiversity. You can see I've included the proceedings from the National Academy of Sciences, big report on the state of pollinators, and they published their journal and a lot of science around the decline of pollinators, but they included an article about 8 simple actions that individuals can take to save insects from global decline. And of those 8 simple actions, and on the far right of the screen, look at the first three relate specifically to what we do when we garden, what we do when we engage with the landscape, convert lawns into diverse natural habitats, grow native plants, reduce pesticide and herbicide use, and look at the fourth one, limit use of exterior lighting. We just need to, again, to make the personal connection, we just need to think about the sound that we hear of those moths, for example, sizzling around those hot outdoor lights. And we know what an impact they can have. So, I could have included a slide, I remember seeing more snakes. I remember seeing more bats, like all of the ways. What, and I'm sharing my passions, but whatever is your passion where you might have experienced a loss or wherever you are talking to someone who isn't quite, you know, on this path yet, but is so close and you want to just tip them over the edge to the importance of biodiversity and creating habitat, what is their passion? What will resonate for them about, biodiversity loss, and then share it. Now, I think another thing we really need to do more work around is actually connecting, and I'm making a kind of a plea for all of us to take this to heart and to do more of the work of connecting climate change and biodiversity loss um, for folks who um, maybe have not heard that message yet, because I don't think it's a message that's out there very deeply or loudly. Um, and yet, um, these are intimately connected issues, and so there is such an awareness of climate change, and there's a lot of fear around climate change, and so we need to connect, or I think it would be very valuable in terms of creating a climate of concern for biodiversity as loss as well, if we connect, if we make the link for people and what between climate change and biodiversity loss. And one of the ways that I have found most that resonates for people the most is actually to talk about um, this idea of biodiversity as basically a web of connection, and that it's a web of connection that, like a spider web, that creates resilience. That web stays together. The more connections there are, the stronger is that web. It's the same with biodiversity. And on the landscape, it's the same with, having a lot of, like a biodiverse ecosystem of native plants. Um, so I find that resonates with people. And you can see I've put these little, they don't look that great, really, I guess. Those little white bars that I've put on the spider web, that's just trying to demonstrate, like, if some of those links are lost, the web is still going to stay together. But think about climate change and all of the stresses on the landscape. Like, it's huge. And so we need resilience. And biodiversity is that resilience. Biodiversity is that web of connection. And I find that message resonates for people as to why, and makes the connection for them, as to why native plants are the foundation of food webs, the foundation of biodiversity. I think we also um, can make a much stronger case out there for people and make that connection clear for people. I think it's really important to do it again without being shouty, if you know what I mean, without being, shaming people for having non-native plants or maybe just having one native plant. And we're not going to bring people in that way. But what we are, I think, how we will bring the unconverted in is if we talk about people's love of monarchs and all the incredible interest in monarch butterflies. And that resonates for people. It's incredible, the change. I mentioned that I've been writing books about native plant gardening and doing presentations and talking to people and gardeners for more than 30 years. When I first started writing about um, gardening with native plants, it was actually illegal in the province I live in, Ontario, and many provinces in Canada, and I'm sure places in the States. It was actually illegal to grow milkweed because it was considered a noxious weed for agriculture, and many of the weed lists were drawn up for agricultural purposes. And so the shift that has happened in 30 years, it was slow. It felt slow being in the middle of it, but it's happened. And I hope that the changes that come now are faster. There's an urgency, but the change that's happened around, the idea of milkweed and a native plant and monarchs and the understanding of that crucial connection, we're, leaps and bounds ahead. So let's build on that with people and share that actually the monarch is not an anomaly, that most herbivorous insects, so most of the insects that eat plants, the butterflies and moths in their caterpillar stages, they're specialist feeders, and they feed in plants on um, in fewer than three different plant families. So I think this resonates for people, this idea of co-evolved relationships between native plants and the insects and all the creatures they evolved with, that they've spent millions of years co-evolving with. And really, basically, my advice in terms of bringing in the unconverted, talk about butterflies. It really works. And if this idea of co-evolved relationships is sometimes hard um, to kind of, I don't know, to bring in the unconverted, to get people excited about, you often hear the fast food analogy. You know, you'll often hear people saying, well, native plants are important. They're the basis of the food web, so important. That's such an important message. And then you'll often hear an analogy like, and non-native plants are like fast food. That is an analogy that is an analogy that resonates for people. Another one I find really easy uh, that resonates as well is just when you think about, if you relate it to humans, there's lots of, there are lots of, we have not evolved to digest wood, for example, or to get nutrition from wood, from the cellulose in wood. We can drink, and so my example here is the pine. We can drink tea made from the pine needles. It's not going to poison us. But if we tried to eat that wood, we could not survive. The cellulose passes through our intestines, our small intestines intact. So we don't have the enzyme to break that down. So, it's kind of the analogy with Lepidoptera, the larva, the butterflies and moths who just can't eat any old leaf. Another example that I've found that really resonates for people and helps kind of um, make the connection or strengthen the connection for people between this idea of the importance of native plants and the importance of co-evolved relationships to biodiversity and to strengthening that web of connection and resilience and healthy ecosystems. Um, just a moment ago, I mentioned these specialist relationships like the monarchs and the milkweed. Well, something that I have found people really respond to is the idea of the co-evolutionary relationship between bees, native bees, um, and and native plants, and the fact that research is revealing some of the amazing things about the ways that bees self-medicate with native plants. So I've just chosen one example of this research here from Leif Richardson, because he used to be based in Toronto and he was a colleague of Sheila Colla's, my co-author on the most recent book, and who was a bee scientist, and very sadly she passed away in the summer. But did amazing work. And Leif Richardson was one of Sheila's colleagues, and I learned this from Sheila about the way that bees self-medicate. And the example here is that these half-black bumblebees, what Leif's research revealed is that so the native bees are commonly infected with this very common intestinal parasite. And when they seek out flowers that have such as the native turtle head, that have the highest concentrations of the chemicals that will help medicate them, that will help them heal. So the idea that our gardens can be pharmacies, I think, really can resonate for people. I think what we have to deal with is the reality that for a lot of people out there, when we talk about um, uh, native plants and the fact that there are all these incredible co-evolved relationships, unfortunately, what most people are thinking about are weeds. And my proof for this is anecdotal, but wow, um, has it ever been strong in that for the last, 30 years, giving presentations to gardening groups. So these are already, um, people who are interested in gardening. And I will say, I start off my presentations about gardening with native plants. I will say, what is the first thing you think of when I say native plants? And you know what people have said for the last 30 years, like including last week, they're still saying it. What they say is weeds. There is an idea out there that native plants are weeds. And yet, this is so ironic because for these same gardeners, most of the because then I will say, hey, what are the weeds that cause you trouble in your gardens? And every single one is a non-native plant. But there is such, I guess I'll say, difficulty out there in understanding that not every plant that grows in the wild without human cultivation is a native plant. In fact, a lot of them are introduced. So anyway, I really do think we have to share that message loudly and clearly because I think um, the association of native plants and with this idea of weeds is what is preventing people, a lot of people, the unconverted, from taking up native plant gardening and habitat creation. So one of the places to start, actually, that I have observed as very useful is to talk about goldenrod. And again, I bet the chat might explode with this idea that goldenrod can be very spreading. And um, of course, there are dozens of species, different species of native goldenrod within that genus of Solidago. So I think we have to get the message out there that one, go and I say spread the word to friends, family, and random strangers, really, random strangers. Find an excuse to talk about goldenrod and share the message that it does not cause hay fever. Unfortunately, that idea is out there. People mistake it for ragweed. That idea is still out there. So that's number one. Share what an incredible plant it is for pollinators and birds. And, if you love birds and butterflies and bees, goldenrod is fantastic. And that there are so many different species to choose from, and not all of them are spreaders. So this is actually a brochure that a friend, Ryan Godfrey, and I put together. We're both involved in a group called Project Swallowtail. And we heard over and over again, people, think goldenrod is bad to plant, and yet it's an incredible plant for biodiversity. And so we wrote this brochure, which is downloadable from the City of Toronto website. And I encourage you, like, if you have a neighbor, like, just who thinks goldenrod causes hay fever, whatever, print out this brochure and drop it in their mailbox anonymously. Look at this is again from Sheila's in my book, all of the um, specialist relationships supported by goldenrod by the genus Solidago. So we ran out of room for this one too. It's like more than just in the east, just in the northeast, it's more than 25 species of pollen specialist bees, and I don't really get into in this talk, but we get into a lot in the book. It's a specialist relationship, very important. And more than 120 different species of moths and butterflies in their larval stage. So very important. I am hopeful, if we can find fun little examples to share with people. Like, I love the idea that which I learned from this Dr. John Hilty's amazing website, illinoiswildflowers.info, that the golden stowaway moth, it likes to hide in the flowers of early goldenrod. Like, how cute is that? Is this a way to help people love goldenrod, the huge, and to make this really kind of personal in a way? Now, I think we're also, I think one thing I would call on us to do as well for those who are already the converted, and for those of you who are new to this idea of ecological gardening and maybe gardening with native plants, I think we are called upon to kind of rethink our attitude as well and encourage others to have a different sort of attitude to the native plants that are like goldenrod, that are often dismissed as weedy, and therefore are quote unquote weeded out. So a plant like fleabane, it is a healing plant. It is one of nature's first responders to damage, to poor soil, to disturbance, to, something that's really disruptive to the landscape, whether it's human induced or some other, phenomenon. And so look at all of the, So it is a host plant for a number of moths, including a specialist for whom fleabane, the Erigeron flower moth, that's its host plant. That's its only listed known larval host plant, according to the Owlet caterpillars of Eastern North America. So let's really encourage a new attitude towards these what are called the ruderal native plants. So these are the native plants that respond to disturbance. And you can see in the middle photo, like that's near where I live. It's a construction site and it was under construction for years. And it was amazing to see the native plants like, the very spreading Canada goldenrod, but of course there are all these other species of goldenrod that are not as spreading. But to see the way that, the fleabanes, the goldenrod, and eventually the asters, the native asters, moved in. So these ruderal native plants that respond to disturbance that are great, and that, as it turns out, actually support the greatest number of specialist pollinator species as well. So they're doing incredible healing work, and in terms of biodiversity. And yet, I think, and they're incredibly easy to grow. So what a way to bring people in. So let's be careful about the attitudes and really encourage a positive attitude towards plants that are often dismissed. And nowhere, I mean, I think one of the ways to encourage this positive attitude is through modeling and showing how tough these plants are, what beauty they create in tough situations. Like at this nursing home on the left, you can see during drought, the grass, the lawn is dead, but look at that flourishing ecosystem, prairie ecosystem in the garden. I think there's a kind of what we need to acknowledge is that there's kind of an idea out there of like certainly in the conventional gardening world, that any volunteer plant can be invasive, spread, um, even if they're not using the word invasive in the ecological way of like an introduced plant from elsewhere. But that, there's an attitude of volunteer plants can really get out of control. And that is true. It is absolutely true that non-native introduced species called invasive, can cause huge ecological damage and problems. But I think we have to be careful about perpetuating that attitude. And I'm kind of referring back to these ruderal native plants, which have such ecological value. We have to be careful not to perpetuate an attitude to all kind of volunteer plants as, destructive and should be ripped out. This is just a tragic example from where I'm based, where, this, you can see from this Facebook post, I've taken out their name, but it was someone who was ripping out a plant that is incredibly interesting and rare. It's a parasitic, like a parasitic plant on, so it doesn't produce its own chlorophyll. It's dependent on a host plant for nutrients. Very rare, unusual here. Incredibly interesting. And this person was just ripping it out because they figured, well, it was volunteered as invasive. And then this amazing botanist, Wazel Bukowski, who has like done population surveys of native plants in Ontario, was like, oh, he'd seen this species 3 times in his field work. So this attitude can have real implications. Okay, I think, demonstrating, here's another example to demonstrate the resilience and strength of these plants. This is my friend Miriam's boulevard garden, and you can see in an area where, oh, I don't know, in this States you often call them health strips. So you can see the health strips all around her, grass that's dying, and look at her, drought tolerant naturalization. Um, so our gardens matter. I just realized as well at this point in the talk, I haven't shown a whole lot of gardens and I've talked a lot theoretically. So I'm going to just share a few examples of gardens of resilience and biodiversity and befores and after. I'll go through them kind of quickly because we're getting close. So before and after, I find it very inspiring for people seeing the way, you know, the biodiversity that can replace what is essentially a monoculture of lawn, and how it can happen very quickly. Like this is Pam's in my front yard after our ash tree had to come down. So we planted a red oak and a savanna, and that's a year later, and that's 2 years later. Or, you know, these tucked away places that, you know, like this is in a laneway that my friend Todd did. I
You
think
don't
we
have to
also,
rush so much. They're kind of neat to look
okay,
at. So you don't have
okay,
to, yeah, yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. If you want,
Okay, I
yeah, yep,
appreciate that.
yeah, sure thing.
Um, because these gardens, I think a message that's out there, and I've tried to, in those before and afters, I tried to show a diversity of styles. And right here, from the wildest that you can see on the right, like that is a wild meadow that I adore, and was started at the home of an ecologist and urban planner, Nina Marie Lister, who you won't be surprised to hear received a visit from bylaw over this. And she fought back, and a group of us who are very involved, including Nina Marie, in reforming weed ordinances and bylaws. Um, we it led to a change in Toronto's bylaw, but I think there's an idea out there that any native plant garden has to be really wild looking. This is on the left, my friend Julia's garden, which is mainly native plants with some non-natives as well, but mainly native plants, which I would say, you know, has the look of a more familiar style of garden to us. We also need to so I think we need to reassure people, hey, whatever style appeals to you, you can, you know, have a native plant garden with that style. I think we also have to spread the message of you know, we can do this work everywhere. This is my friend Jode and Carol's on the left in basically a window well. When you think about, and it's, you know, they've got whatever, 6 different native plants in this tiny spot on a main street in a big city. When you think about the foraging difference, this is another message that I find resonates for people. The foraging distance of these tiny creatures like bees, especially some of the tiniest bees, those distances that they move in order to get their food, um, is actually like very limited. Like it can be easily under a mile, under a kilometer, you know, 500 meters. These are small distances. What we do in our small places really matters to those creatures. Like if we have habitat, even if it's just in this tiny spot, because that's the only access to soil that we have, it will be meaningful. Or this is a grow bag on the right that's out front of Pam's in my place because most of the land here in our little space is very shady. So I wanted to plant some sun-loving, you know, asters and goldenrods. So I did it in a grow bag in the sunniest spot. The visitors to that, it makes such a difference. Look at all of um, the specialist relationships on just those, and that's not even all of them. We couldn't fit them all for the 6 native plants. It's in Jode and Carol's tiny little garden. It's very meaningful what we do. I think we also need to, when we create habitat anywhere and everywhere, it's so meaningful to biodiversity. Of course, the landscape, North America, is basically monoculture within a huge swath, 40 million acres, and that's a 2005 statistic. So getting out the message there. To people who are just starting in on this and getting out an encouraging message rather than oh, you know, instead of thinking, oh my, you know, oh, you shouldn't have lawn, don't do that, it's terrible. You know, find out why they have lawn, find out what they use it for, what we use it for, what it's good for, why we might have some, and then ask people. I found this very has impact. Ask people how much of your lawn do you actually use for the things that lawns that you want a lawn for, that you use it for. Well, and consider giving over the area, you're not using actively to turn it into active habitat, and then encouraging people about the very simple and straightforward and low maintenance ways to do that. Wood chips, yard bags and cardboard, solarizing. Those are very easy ways. And then I find that I don't want, although I did write a book called 100 Easy to Grow Native Plants, and that was about I don't know, almost 30 years ago. And it's still in print. So that's, um, but I should really change it a little bit more, the introduction or something, because it talks all about, it really focuses on this message of low maintenance, which I think resonates for people, but we have to be careful to not give the impression that low maintenance is no maintenance. But what we can do for people who are, on the cusp and open to this message of shrinking the lawn, or for those of you who are new to this whole arena of ecological gardening and habitat creation, planting some native shrubs, incredibly valuable for biodiversity. Think of all the flowers that are on one shrub. And so share ideas of native shrubs that people can grow in your area. All of the plants that I chose today to include have this broad native range pretty much because I realized we're coming from a lot of different places over the east, northeast, mid-Atlantic. So, let people know about or, share these or share native shrubs that actually share information about native shrubs that produce food that, like the chokeberry that you can make, as I did, this delicious jam out of. People love the food native plant connection. That's a way to draw people in. Or when they're shrinking their lawn, talk about what an amazing native ground cover woodland strawberry is for shade, or wild strawberry is for sun, and how that makes a great lawn alternative that really increases is such a biodiversity support because as you can see, Sheila and I ran out of room to list, it's an ongoing theme, to list all of the pollen specialist bees and Lepidoptera that for whom the native strawberry is a host plant. Demonstrate alternatives. This is a kind of guerrilla project I did in a boulevard in Toronto, sedges instead. I just, the boulevard was not looked after. It was a city boulevard, and I planted a demonstration of sedges that could be lawn alternatives. And look at all of the specialist relationships sedges, the caryxes, have, and how, if you're really into the way that lawn looks, you can achieve that look with sedges as well. That's right after planting. Signage can be really important to share and encourage people in this journey so that you don't run into trouble. This is my favorite garden sign. It was a meme or went viral. I don't know the original source. If anyone does, put it in the chat, please. But I know it was making its rounds. If something is not eating your plants, then your garden is not part of the ecosystem. So I'm getting close to the end. Birds, bees, and butterflies are a big hook. Maybe we'll get to the point where we can, after birds, bees, and butterflies are the gateway, we can get people interested in bats, beetles, and bagworms as well, because they're all part of biodiversity. We can get people interested in moths, which, they're already interested in butterflies. Well, 12,000 known species plus of moths in North America. If we could have, if we could encourage, okay, monarchs and milkweeds. Well, what are the native host plants for those, more than 12,000 moths? Let's get to that place, or let's get to the place of appreciating, the native beetles like the dogbane beetle that feeds on the leaves of dogbane and the larval as an adult, but the larvae feed on the roots and it protects them. These are relationships that matter to biodiversity and their relationships that native plants support. Um, so, leaving the leaves, I'll just end there with, the importance of that. But people are afraid that plants won't be able to grow up through that. So we have to show them, we have to share examples like this that I photographed out front from, a deep layer of leaves that I didn't touch. And from April to June, the plants came up through it, or share with people the importance of the different nesting and overwintering habitat for bees, leaving the plant stalks. We get into this a lot more in the book. Or the importance of nurse logs, dead wood, that these are sources of life. So I'm going to end with the example that I referred to right at the beginning when I showed Lena Liang's garden. And I said, remember that garden? Lena is someone I met who she was she was not a gardener. She was not involved in biodiversity, or it wasn't really on her radar. And she heard about monarchs on the radio. And she was like, okay, well, what can I do to help monarchs? And she heard about milkweed. So she planted milkweed and a couple of native plants in her backyard in an area that's all lawn. And she sat out there all the time having tea, coffee in the morning. And she noticed a bee who was visiting who looked different from all the other bumblebees she'd seen. Turned out it was a yellow-banded bumblebee, endangered, threatened, special concern all over the place, and it found her native plants in a sea of lawns. This work matters. And not only is the yellow-banded bumblebee so special in its own right, but it's also kind of the host nest for a bee that's sneaky, that builds its nests in another bee species of bees. So there's a specialist relationship between those two species. So these are the kinds of, I don't know, relationships and stories that I find can really, I don't know, resonate for people. I hope it's resonated for you, and you won't be surprised that it really resonated for Lena. Look at her garden now, the patch that grew when she saw the value, when she experienced it firsthand. So I know that these are dark times. I know that there's a lot of bad news out there in all kinds of ways, and bad news about biodiversity and climate change. But, we can do something positive, we can make a difference. So thank you very much. Thanks, Renee and the Western Reserve Land Conservancy for the information. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I'll stop sharing my screen, and I know that we've got some time for questions. And I know that I
Yes.
went through this very quickly. I kind of tend to speak sort of quickly anyway. I get very excited about this, but I know that the recording is
Yeah,
going to be available for a week if
for
I went
sure.
things too quickly and you
Absolutely.
need
Yeah, and I will definitely share that out with folks that are here and couldn't make it today. So thank you for that. Just quickly, there's some people that don't know what soil solarizing is. So can
Oh,
you
okay.
explain that a little bit? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So it's one of the easiest ways actually to prepare a planting bed. And what it involves is, let's say you've got a big area of lawn and you're like, okay, I want to create a patch of habitat, but how do I get rid of the lawn? Do I have to dig it up? That's a lot of work. Well, solarization is one way where you put down some people use black plastic, some people use clear plastic, and there's some research out there around which works better. And I'm pretty sure that the final word is that clear plastic works better, which I was sort of surprised about because I would have thought black plastic. But anyway, either works. And first you will mow the lawn. If it's a grass area that you're doing, if it's a different area, pull out whatever you can that's there of the vegetation that you don't want, or mow the lawn short as it can, and then cover it with the plastic and leave and weigh it down so it doesn't blow off, and leave it down for you have to leave it down for at least two or 3 months in the heat of the summer, and it'll basically fry the vegetation underneath. It will also destroy the microorganisms in the soil. But if you're doing a smallish area, those microorganisms are going to migrate back into that soil. So it doesn't, kill the soil, it does cause a temporary diminishment of microorganisms. So, and then at the end of that, you take up the plastic and you've got a really great weed-free planting bed ready where all the weed seeds in the soil have also, chances are good, been solarized as well. Hope
I've
that.
had success too with laying down very thick cardboard in my garden. I know it's not solarizing, but I've had success with smothering out Japanese knotweed that way.
Sorry, you had trouble?
I smothered out Japanese knotweed that way.
That
Yeah.
is so inspiring because
Yeah.
as
It's a rough
many of
one.
us,
It's a rough one. Yeah.
congrats, very good. The way
Fortunately,
I,
I didn't have a huge stand of it, so I was lucky in that regard. But okay, let me get on to these questions that folks asked you here. Um, Michael asks, municipalities are often hostile to planting native herbaceous plants along public right of ways. Safety issues are often cited. Can you provide some advice with respect to dealing with municipal regulations?
oh, yes, I can. You have, I love that question. It's something that I devote a lot of my time to. I do a lot of volunteer work around working with municipalities to try to get them to reform their policies around grass and weeds and boulevards. And what I've found is that municipalities, and I know that there are nuances around the difference between in the US and Canada and within different municipalities within these large areas, but a couple of generalizations. I have found that municipalities are very worried, understandably, about height issues. They're concerned about sight lines and obstruct. So that's one thing. So kind of coming up with, plant list, recommended plant lists of native plants that are short enough for a boulevard that um, they won't obstruct sightlines. And I will just give a shout out to a group that's local to me anyway here, but is very active online called Blooming Boulevards. And they have incredible resources on their website, including lists of low-growing native plants that are appropriate for boulevards and that are salt tolerant. That's another issue on a boulevard.
Yeah.
Um, so municipalities are worried about sight lines. So you have to reassure, you have to come up with convincing, ways to do this that is not going to cause sightline issues. Municipalities are worried about liability issues. Um, and that's kind of sightline related too. They're also worried about having obstructions on boulevards for snow plows, for example, if you're in an area that gets snow. So, I was delighted when I was out in Seattle a number of years ago to see that Seattle allows all kinds of, raised beds. I saw so many people growing food on their boulevards in Seattle and raised beds. Well, no snow, no snow plow issues. So, those are some of the things that immediately come to mind. I guess as my general comment as well, though, and this applies to boulevards, it applies to anything to do with the bylaw and weed ordinance work. Find out what the municipality or the body that's in the way of progress, or okay, in this bubble we see as
Yes.
progress, right? It's progress.
Yeah.
Um, Find out what their concerns are. Get them to articulate them because I think often the concerns are based on aesthetics, but municipalities aren't really keen to say because they know how untenable it is to say, well, we don't want you to plant the boulevard because most people won't like the way it looks. Like, that's terrible. So they kind of hide behind other issues often. So try to get them to articulate it. Or people who, aren't are reporting their neighbors who have naturalized and the people who are doing the reporting are just like concerned about property values. Well, property values only, like, it's a system that we all have to that we made. If we actually saw value as a space that supports biodiversity, you know, and we rethink what we term property value. I don't like the term property, but land value, you know?
Mhm.
Um, that's anyway, I hope that's
Yeah.
helpful to the
Yeah.
question about boulevards. I could talk about, in fact, I
I
do.
took some notes too that I'll put in my follow-up email. But moving back to Virginia Creeper, Lorraine, here's someone that would like some advice on what to say to folks that claim that it is, if it's climbing on a tree, it's going to kill the tree. What is the good
Right.
combination of words to help correct that thinking?
Yeah, well, it is true that there are some vines that will, that concern comes from a good place, a place of tree protection. Yay. So I guess it's really important to validate, that fabulous impulse and to work with it and say, yes, we need to worry about trees and we need to look at any causes of harm to trees. So, I mean, I think actually we can there are situations in which native vines, I'm thinking of, let's say, native grapevines, can actually take down and kill a tree. So, it has it. I'm not saying that's a reason not to. Oh my goodness. I hope I'm not implying you shouldn't plant native grapevine. I'm just
I know
saying,
we love our native vitis
yes,
here, okay?
yes, yay. I'm just saying, like, work with the person's concern. Share examples that there are so many plants that are introduced that are actually causing the problems to trees when they climb up. And anyway, hopefully that
It
helps.
is true though that Virginia creeper does not attach in the same way, right? It does not cause any damage when it's attaching and climbing the
That's right.
tendrils.
That's right. And
Yeah.
there's so many concerns as well about, uh,
Mortar work.
mortar.
And it does not
Exactly.
damage that.
So there's
Yeah.
so much good research out there as
Hmm.
well. Like it's simple Google searches on that will lead you to science, to
Hmm.
research that you can share with people. That's one way, although I really do try not to go the, bombard people with science route,
Hmm.
but it's nice to have in your back pocket.
Yeah.
I'm not just making this up. This is actually confirmed by science.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe your front pocket too.
Okay, so here's someone that loves the idea of removing some lawn and transplanting it with natives. But part of the reluctance is because it's not easy, it's easier in their opinion to maintain lawn. What could be used besides mulch to suppress weeds in native gardens?
Right. Yeah, I love that question. These are all so amazing, and I feel like, oh, I could talk about this for such a long time. But because there is a little bit of a tension, I think, between this idea. Like, I actually think lawn maintenance is incredibly high maintenance. Like, I
I
don't think it's,
agree.
and so
Hmm.
this idea that, I don't. I've had native plant gardens, in these small spots, admittedly, but then I also do a lot of public native plant gardens as well. And they're so the using the, planting for low maintenance, they're incredibly low maintenance. I don't think I
Hmm.
spend any time out there in
Especially if you control them and keep them, I don't want to say tight, but if you keep what you want in the garden, it sort of suppresses the things that you don't want.
exactly, like
Move things around.
using native plants as the actual mulch is is almost the ultimate in low maintenance. Like
Yeah.
no bare soil, which is what we've done in the front and the back, basically. No bare soil, the quote unquote weeds cannot kind of get in there. So I think that is one way to really get people on board with the idea that native plant gardening can be a lot lower maintenance than lawn maintenance. Um, and yeah, it's all in the, choosing the right plant, the right place. And those are
Yeah.
messages that I think will resonate with gardeners because basically however you're gardening, that's an important
Yeah.
thing to keep in mind.
And someone just put a comment in the Q&A section, but it's something to reiterate to everyone is that, even with vines, you have to annually prune them and maintain them, as with all plants. So, if you're worried about a vine taking over a tree, you can always prune it back a bit.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I also just want to make one little comment about the bare soil comment I just made, because, of course, let's not forget the ground nesting bees who need a bit of bare soil,
Mhm. Yeah.
who nest in bare soil, and so it's a really good idea to leave some bare soil for them as well.
Yeah. Well, Lorraine, I didn't ask you this before today, but is anything on the horizon that you could share with us? Are you working on anything new? Or if you can't divulge, I understand. I'm kidding you on the spot.
No, that's fine. You know what I'm really excited about right now, and I think I mentioned I do a lot of work around bylaw reform in the US and Canada and municipal weed ordinance reform. So I'm working on
Nice.
some educational materials around this with the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign.
Nice.
So that's
Yeah,
exciting.
for
The other
sure.
thing, I'm very involved with Project Swallowtail and our advocacy committee around a campaign, an educational campaign around alternatives to chemical mosquito spraying,
Mm.
because I think it's a very common practice out
Mhm.
there
Yeah,
and it's really harming biodiversity. And there are ways we can, like, I
yeah,
understand who wants to be eaten alive by mosquitoes all summer. Well, there
right.
are alternatives. So, working on campaigns around, getting rid of standing water,
Mhm.
using mosquito dunks, that kind of thing. And
Will,
really,
will you be covering things like, bat boxes and the
oh,
number of,
yeah,
yeah. And
yes,
I mean, even
verbal mark.
dragonfly, in their larval stage, they eat so many mosquito larvae in the ponds. So, all that stuff, it's all about biodiversity.
It's all about biodiversity. It's all about connections, webs of
Yeah,
connection, and somehow just spreading that message. I think it makes we kind of like things simple sometimes,
yeah,
you know,
mhm,
but you know what? We're in hard times, and
yeah,
the messages, sometimes, but it's not hard to make those connections, and those connections resonate and are so positive for people.
right, for sure. Well, Lorraine, thank you so very much. I want to remind everyone in 2 weeks, Thursday, February 19th, we'll be back here for session 3. Sharon Salvaggio from Xerces Society is going to present on nursery to nature, how to find, grow, and collaborate for pollinator safe plants. So I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, and everyone have a nice, warm rest of your day. Thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks.